Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to think about something small. The last time a doctor told you a number about your own body, your cholesterol, your potassium, the level of a medication in your blood, you believed it. You had no choice. You cannot taste potassium. You cannot feel a milligram. Somewhere behind that number is a machine, and behind that machine is a bottle of liquid whose value somebody had to decide was true. And behind that bottle is a very short chain of very quiet people who spend their lives making sure that truth is actually true. Almost nobody knows they exist. They do not get parades. They get treated quite often like maintenance staff. The story I'm about to tell you is about one of those people, a man his in-laws laughed at for 12 years, a man whose brother-in-law thought he was doing him a favor by arranging what the family openly called a pity interview. A janitor job would be generous for him, they said, and they laughed about it all week, at the dinner table, in group chats, in front of his 9-year-old son. And then he sat down in a conference room on the 14th floor, and the man across the table read his name twice, and stood up, and his voice came out wrong. I love this story because the revenge in it is not loud. It is arithmetic. It is a man who spent his whole life proving that numbers can be trusted, finally turning that skill on the people who trusted him least. Stay with me to the end, because the last thing he takes from them is not money, and it is not their jobs, and you will not see it coming. Garrison Bracewell owned 2 shirts he liked and wore them in rotation, and if you had asked anyone at the Stoddard family cookout what he did for a living, you would have gotten 4 different wrong answers. Dolores Stoddard, his mother-in-law, told people he fixed machines. Langston Stoddard, his father-in-law, said something about a laboratory in a tone that made it sound like a broom closet with a sink. His sister-in-law Lindsay had once, at a wedding, introduced him to a table of strangers as Katrina's husband. He's very handy. And Dexter Stoddard, his brother-in-law, who had a title long enough to require a second line on his business card, simply said Gar was between things, and had been between things since roughly the Clinton administration. The cookout was in the backyard of the house on Fairmount, the one with the pergola Langston had paid a contractor $11,000 to build, and then described, at every gathering since, as something he threw together. Gar arrived with a cooler of the good root beer his son liked, and a folding table nobody had asked for, because Dolores always ran out of table space and then blamed the caterer she had not hired. He was 41. He had a way of standing that made people forget he was there, weight even, hands loose, eyes moving over things in a slow, cataloging way. His hands were the only loud thing about him. They were scarred across the knuckles from years of glass, and the pad of his right thumb had a shiny patch where a torch had kissed it when he was 22. And if you watched him pick up a paper plate, you would notice he did it the way a surgeon picks up a scalpel, thumb and 2 fingers, no wobble. Katrina came out with a tray of deviled eggs and did not look at him. 12 years of marriage had turned into a kind of weather between them, gray and steady and hard to complain about specifically. She had started saying things like, "I'm just tired," in a voice that meant something else. She had started leaving her phone face down on every surface in the house, including surfaces where a phone made no sense, like the arm of the couch, like the edge of the tub. Gar had noticed. Gar noticed everything. That was, in a very literal sense, his profession. Dexter arrived last, which he always did, in a leased German sedan he parked across 2 spaces, which he also always did. He was 36 and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once been in a room where his last name did not help him. At Aldergate Diagnostics, he was director of supplier strategy, a job he described at parties as basically running the supply chain for a company that touches 40 million patients a year, which was true in the way that a man who sells hot dogs outside a stadium is basically in professional sports. He hugged his mother, kissed his sister, punched his father lightly on the shoulder, and then turned to Gar with the expression of a man about to hand out charity in front of witnesses. "So," Dexter said, loud enough for the pergola, "I did a thing for you." Gar set down the cooler. "Okay. I pulled a string. Facilities is hiring at the tower. Building services, custodial, whatever they call it now. I got you an interview. Thursday, 9 a.m., 14th floor." He spread his hands like a man releasing doves. "Don't thank me." There was a beat of silence, and then Langston laughed, and once Langston laughed, Everyone was permitted to. Lindsay put a hand over her mouth. Dolores said Dexter, in the tone that means keep going. And Katrina, who had married this man in a courthouse because they could not afford anything else, who had cried against his shoulder the night her grandmother died, looked at the deviled eggs and said nothing at all. Honestly, Dexter said, even a janitor job is generous for him. Do you know what the benefits are? Dental. Actual dental. Dexter, I'm being nice. From the porch steps, a small voice said, my dad has a lab. Easton Bracewell was 9. He had his father's hands and his mother's chin, and a habit of standing very still when adults were being strange. He was holding a bottle of the good root beer, and he had heard all of it. Dexter turned, delighted. He's got a shed, buddy. It's a lab. Sure it is. Gar crossed the grass, took the root beer out of his son's hand, opened it on the edge of the folding table with a flick of his palm, and handed it back. Then he looked at Dexter for a moment longer than was comfortable, and said, in a perfectly pleasant voice, Thursday at 9. 14th floor. I'll be there. He said it the way another man might say checkmate in 11 moves, if the other man could not see the board. Later, driving home in the 1998 pickup with the door that had to be lifted slightly to close, Easton asked him if he was going to take the job. No, Gar said. Then why are you going? Gar thought about it honestly, because he did not lie to his son. Because I want to see who's in the room. To understand what happened on that 14th floor, you have to understand what Garrison Bracewell actually did, and why almost nobody knew. When he was 19 and out of options, he had walked into a converted creamery on the edge of Chagrin Falls, Ohio, because a card on a hardware store corkboard said, apprentice wanted, steady hands, no experience necessary, no fools. The man who had written the card was named Oakley Stedman, and he was 71, and he had forearms like bridge cable, and he ran a business called 9 Bark Metrology out of the old milk cooling room because the walls were thick, and the temperature was stable, and the floor was poured on bedrock so a passing truck could not shiver a balance. Stedman made reference materials. Specifically, he made primary clinical reference materials, and for the first 6 months Gar had no idea what that meant. Here is what it means. When a hospital measures something in your blood, the analyzer does not know anything. It is a very expensive machine that measures light, or voltage, or mass, and turns that into a number. To turn a signal into a number, it has to be told what a known amount looks like. So every morning, in every lab in the country, somebody runs a calibrator through the machine, a small sealed vial of liquid with a value printed on the box, and the machine adjusts itself to agree with that value. Which means the entire edifice, every diagnosis, every dose, every decision to send someone home or open their chest, rests on one question. Who decided the number on that box was correct, and how do they know? The answer is a chain. The value on a routine calibrator is assigned by comparing it to a secondary standard. The secondary standard's value is assigned by comparing it to a primary reference material. And the primary reference material is not compared to anything, because it is where the comparison stops. Its value is established by direct measurement, gravimetrically, with weights traceable to the international kilogram, in a room where the humidity is controlled to a %, and the analyst signs their name on a certificate that says, in effect, I did this, and I am telling you it is true. There were, when Gar started, 11 such operations in North America. There were now 3. 9 Bark was one of them, and for 14 of the 22 assays that Aldergate Diagnostics sold to hospitals, it was the only one. Stedman taught him the way old men teach, by refusing to explain twice. Gar learned to clean glass until it squeaked and then clean it again. He learned to weigh in the early morning before the building's heat cycle started, and to wait 4 minutes after closing the balance door because the air had to stop moving. He learned that the enemy was never dramatic. The enemy was a fingerprint. The enemy was a 2-degree change nobody logged. The enemy was a man who was in a hurry. Anyone can make a measurement, Stedman told him once, holding a sealed ampule up to the window light. The whole job is being the kind of person whose measurement means something. That takes about 30 years and you can lose it in an afternoon. When Stedman's hands finally went, Gar took over the bench. When Stedman died 4 years ago, Gar took over everything, including a quiet monthly payment to Stedman's widow that he had never mentioned to a living soul, including his wife. He did not advertise. Metrology does not have customers the way a restaurant does. It has a short list of manufacturers who need their chain to end somewhere defensible, and they find you. He answered his own phone. He shipped his own boxes. And at the bottom of every certificate of analysis that left the creamery, in the block marked authorized signatory, was the same handwritten name, G. Bracewell. That signature was in the master traceability file of every major diagnostics manufacturer in the country. Quality directors cited it in audits. Assessors asked for it by name. There were people who had worked with that signature for 15 years and had never seen the man's face, had never even, in some cases, been entirely sure it was one person, because it appeared in so many places that it had acquired the flavor of an institution. Gar liked it that way. He drove a pickup with a bad door because every spare dollar went into the creamery, into a college account with his son's name on it, and into an envelope for a widow in Painesville. He had told Katrina, once, early on, what he did. He had taken her out there at night, turned on the lights over the bench, showed her the ampules in their racks like 100 small clear soldiers, and tried to explain the chain. She had listened, and kissed him, and said, "So you make the medicine?" "No," he had said. "I make sure the ruler is a ruler." She had smiled and said that was sweet, and over the next 12 years, as her brother's car got newer, and her mother's questions got sharper, "He makes sure the ruler is a ruler," curdled slowly into, "He works in a shed." And Gar, who had never in his life felt the need to be believed, let it. That was his one real mistake. Not pride, patience. He assumed that being right would eventually be enough. 11 months before the cookout, Dexter Stoddard had a problem that was entirely of his own making. He had been promoted into supplier strategy on the strength of a presentation about aggressive category rationalization, which is a phrase that means buying the same thing for less from someone worse. He had promised the executive committee a 9% reduction in his category's spend by the end of the fiscal year. By month 7, he was at 2%, and the 2% had come from renegotiating the office coffee. So he went looking through the ledger for something expensive that nobody would miss, and he found a line item that made no sense to him at all. 9-bark metrology. A single vendor, in Ohio, invoicing Aldergate $190,000 a year for what the system described as reference materials, primary, calibration hierarchy. Dexter looked at the shipping records. In exchange for $190,000, this vendor sent Aldergate, over the course of a year, approximately 400 small glass ampules of clear liquid, total shipped weight under 9 pounds. To a man whose entire professional vocabulary was cost per unit, this looked like theft. He did not call the quality department. He did not read the 2-page memo attached to the contract, written 8 years earlier by a metrologist who had since retired, whose second paragraph began with the words, "under no circumstances." He ran a market scan, and the market obligingly produced Corvus Reference Group, an outfit with a good website, a Delaware address, a fulfillment center outside Rotterdam, and a price of $31,000 a year. Corvus sent a quotation, a glossy capability statement, and certificates. The certificates were beautiful. They had holograms. They had an accreditation number in the footer, and a statement of traceability that used all the correct words. Traceable to the International System of Units, through certified reference materials of higher order. Dexter read that sentence, understood none of it, recognized that it sounded like a yes, and forwarded the whole package to procurement with a note that said, "Clean swap, huge save, let's move." Here is what the sentence actually meant, if you knew how to read it. Corvus did not measure anything. Corvus bought commercial calibrators on the open market, ran them against each other, and assigned values by consensus, which is the measurement equivalent of asking 4 people who all heard it from each other. The certified reference materials of higher order they referenced were themselves secondary, and the accreditation number in the footer belonged to a testing laboratory in Kortrijk that had closed its doors 2 years earlier and had never been accredited for reference material production in the first place. The chain did not end at the international kilogram. The chain ended in a circle. For about 5 months, nothing happened, which is the cruelest part of this kind of failure. A hollow standard does not announce itself. It drifts. Aldergate's analyzers in 406 hospital and clinic laboratories were recalibrated, over a rolling schedule, against a standard that was off by a little, and then the internal quality controls, which were also purchased from the same manufacturer and adjusted to the same false zero, agreed with them, because everyone in the room was lying with the same accent. Garrison Bracewell found out the way he found out everything, because people called him. Not Aldergate. Nobody at Aldergate called him at all. His contract simply ended, with a form letter, and he assumed for a while that they had gone to one of the other two producers, which happens, and which he did not take personally. What was strange were the other calls. A hospital in Youngstown asking why their phenytoin controls suddenly ran low. A children's hospital in Columbus asking whether he had changed a lot number. A lab manager in Erie who said, "Look, this is going to sound crazy, but our machines have started agreeing with each other about the wrong answer." Gar bought Aldergate calibrators through a distributor with his own money, took them out to the creamery, and did what he had spent his life doing. He weighed them. He ran them against his own primary material, the material with the value he had established himself, gravimetrically, in a room where the air had stopped moving. The Aldergate calibrator for phenytoin, the drug hundreds of thousands of people take so they do not have seizures, was reading 18% low, which meant that when a neurologist drew a patient's blood and the machine said the level was 12, the level was actually closer to 14.5. And when the neurologist, seeing 12, raised the dose to get to a comfortable 16, the patient's actual level went to 19, then 22, and the patient started to stumble and slur and see double, and their doctor, looking at a number that said 12, said, "That's strange. Your level is fine. Let's rule out something neurological." The troponin assay, the one that tells an emergency room whether the pain in a man's chest is his heart, was reading 11% low against a threshold that had been set to the third decimal place by an international committee. Gar sat in the creamery for a long time with the printout in front of him, and then he did the thing that any reasonable person would do, which is also the thing that never works. He wrote a letter. He wrote it to the address in Aldergate's supplier portal for quality concerns, which routed to a mailbox called vendorquality@aldergatedx.com. He attached his data. He was careful and unemotional. He wrote a second one 3 weeks later when nobody replied, and a third one 6 weeks after that, this time with the specific request that it be forwarded to the medical director, because he had by then run 4 more assays and 2 of them were worse. He did not know, because he had no way of knowing, that in the migration to the new procurement platform, the vendor quality mailbox had been reassigned to the Director of Supplier Strategy, and that the Director of Supplier Strategy had set up a rule on a Tuesday afternoon that moved anything containing the word traceability into a folder called Later, which he had never once opened. Somebody else did try, from inside. Amelia Nakashima was a medical technologist in Aldergate's Akron laboratory. 34, 11 years on the bench, the kind of tech who reads the package insert for fun. In February, she noticed that her Levy-Jennings charts for 4 analytes had all shifted down and stayed there, not scattered, shifted, which is the signature of a calibration problem and not a random one. She wrote it up. She was told the new calibrator lot had been validated. She wrote it up again, this time with the charts attached, and copied the corporate quality mailbox. 9 days later, she was written up for unauthorized external communication over a text message she had sent a former colleague. 6 weeks after that, in a restructuring that eliminated exactly 1 position in the state of Ohio, she was let go. And on the 8th of March, a 58-year-old maintenance foreman named Merrill Tully drove himself to an emergency department outside Canton with an ache in his jaw and a heaviness in his left arm. They drew his blood. His troponin came back at the 98th percentile of normal, which is to say, normal. They gave him an antacid and a pamphlet about reflux and sent him home at 4 in the morning. He died in his own driveway at 1:15 that afternoon, with the truck door open and the radio still going. His actual troponin, corrected for an 11% low bias, would have crossed the threshold. Not dramatically, by a hair. But that is what a threshold is. Gar did not know Merrill Tully's name yet. He would learn it later, in a room with a lot of lawyers in it, and it would be the only moment in the entire affair when his voice failed him. The week between the cookout and the interview was, in the Stoddard family, one long comedy routine. It moved into the group chat, which was called Stoddard Squad, and which Gar had been added to once, in 2019, by accident. Lindsay posted a stock photo of a mop with a crown drawn on it. Dolores posted a laughing face, and then, 40 minutes later, a message that said, "We all just want him to have purpose," which was worse. Dexter posted a photograph of the Aldergate Tower at dusk with the caption, "Somebody's gotta buff those floors." Langston called on Tuesday, which he never did, and spent 9 minutes explaining to Gar that there was no shame in honest work, in the specific tone of a man who believes there is quite a lot of it. "You get in there," Langston said. "You keep your head down. 5 years you could be a supervisor. That's a real ladder, son." That's good advice, Gar said. Kat needs to see effort. Women need to see effort. At dinner on Wednesday, Katrina finally said it out loud. She had set the table and lit a candle, which meant she had rehearsed. "I think you should take it if they offer it." Gar put down his fork. "Do you?" "It's insurance. It's a pension. It's a building with heat." She turned her water glass in a slow circle. "I'm so tired, Gar. I'm tired of explaining you." "To who?" "To everyone." Easton, at the end of the table, was very still. "Buddy," Gar said, "go get the thing off my truck seat, the brown one." The boy went. Katrina lowered her voice into the shape people use for the honest part. "My mother thinks I should have options," she said. "Options? Don't do that." "What kind of options, Kat?" She did not answer, and in the silence Gar did the arithmetic he had been avoiding for 4 months, and the numbers came out the way he already knew they would. He had noticed, in March, that the odometer on her car was climbing by about 110 miles on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which is a strange amount of driving for a woman whose job was 11 minutes away. He had noticed a parking validation stub in the console with the Aldergate logo on it. He had noticed that the good perfume, the one he had bought her for their 10th anniversary, and which she had always said was for special occasions, was now down 2/3. He had noticed a plastic hotel keycard, the kind with a chip and no branding, tucked in the pocket behind her registration. He had not confronted her, because Garrison Bracewell did not confront things. He measured them, and he had learned, at a bench in a cold room, that the moment you announce you are watching, the thing you are watching changes, and you lose the only honest data you will ever get. What he did not know yet, and would learn in 8 days from a folio printed by a very apologetic front desk manager, was the name on the second key. Xavier Kilbourne was 51, Senior Vice President of Procurement at Aldergate Diagnostics, Dexter Stoddard's boss, and, more to the point, the executive whose signature sat on the Corvus qualification approval. He was the one who had told Dexter that the 9th percentage point was the whole ballgame. He was also, for the last 14 months, meeting Katrina Bracewell at a hotel by the airport on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They had met at a company holiday party Dexter had brought his sister to, deliberately, because Dexter had figured out very early that the fastest way up is not competence, it is leverage, and there is no leverage like knowing exactly what your boss is doing on Tuesdays. Easton came back with the brown folder and set it by his father's plate. Gar did not open it. He put his hand flat on it, the way you rest a hand on a dog's back. "What's in there?" Katrina asked. "Paper," Gar said. Later that night, after the house was dark, Easton came down and found his father sitting at the kitchen table with the folder still closed in front of him. "Are they going to make you a janitor?" "No. Uncle Dexter says you're between things." Gar considered lying to make it easier. He didn't. "Do you know what a ruler is for?" he said. "Measuring." "Right. But who checks the ruler?" He waited. Easton thought about it seriously, the way 9-year-olds do when an adult treats a question as real. "Somebody has to," the boy said finally. "Somebody has to," Gar agreed. "That's the job. That's all the job has ever been. It's the least glamorous work in the world, and if it stops, everything downstream of it becomes a guess, and people make life and death decisions on guesses without ever knowing they're guessing." He tapped the folder twice. "Right now, 406 laboratories are guessing, and a man I've never met is dead." Easton's eyes went wide. "You're gonna tell them?" "I told them 3 times, Gar said. "Thursday, I'm going to go stand in their lobby and make it impossible not to hear me. Thursday, 9 a.m., the Aldergate Diagnostics Tower." Gar wore the better of the 2 shirts. He carried the brown folder and nothing else. No briefcase, no laptop bag. In the lobby, a security guard printed him a visitor badge that said Bracewell, Garrison, and under it, in smaller letters, Candidate, BLDG SVCS. And he clipped it to his shirt pocket without comment, and rode up alone. The 14th floor smelled like carpet glue and cold coffee. A woman with a headset walked him to a glass-walled conference room, apologized twice that facilities was running behind, and said someone would be right with him. The someone who came in 20 minutes later was not from facilities. Kendrick Pellegrin was Aldergate's director of quality systems. He was 56, gray at the temples, and had not slept properly in 3 weeks, because the accreditation body's unannounced assessment window opened in 9 days, and he had spent those 3 weeks trying and failing to reconstruct a traceability chain for 14 assays. And every path he took ended at a Delaware address and an accreditation number that returned a dead page. He had come down to the 14th floor for an entirely unrelated reason, to grab a room. Somebody had told him the small conference room was free after the facilities interviews. He opened the door with his laptop under one arm, saw a man sitting there, said, "Sorry, are you?" and then glanced at the intake sheet on the table, because he was the kind of man who reads what is in front of him. He read the name. He stopped. He read it again. Some part of him, the part that had spent 15 years signing off on master files, went very quiet and then very loud. "I'm sorry," Pellegrin said. "Bracewell, Garrison Bracewell, G. Bracewell. That's right. Of Ninebark. That's right." Pellegrin set his laptop down on the table without looking at it, missed the edge, caught it. He straightened up slowly, the way a man does when his knees have decided something before his brain has. "Sir," he said. His voice came out wrong, thin and young. Is it really you?" "It's me." "You." Pellegrin looked at the visitor badge on Gar's chest, at the words Boldier Zivis, and something crossed his face that was not confusion. It was closer to horror. "Why are you in this room?" "Because your director of supplier strategy got me an interview," Gar said, "for a job cleaning your floors. He's my wife's brother. He thought it would be funny." The director of quality systems stood very still in the middle of a room he had come to borrow, and then he pulled out his phone and did not dial a number so much as attack it. The call lasted 19 seconds. "Suzanne, it's Pellegrin. No, listen to me. I need you and Ovid and the medical director in the executive room in 10 minutes, and I need you to not ask me why on this line." A pause. "Because the signatory is sitting in front of me." Another pause. Longer. "Because he's here for a custodial interview," Pellegrin said, and closed his eyes while he said it. 9 floors up, Suzanne Winterbourne, who had been chief executive of Aldergate Diagnostics for 6 years, and had come up through the assay development side, said a word she did not use in front of the board, and stood. They moved Gar to the executive conference room, which had a table like an airstrip and a window wall looking north to the lake. Somebody brought him coffee he did not drink. Within 20 minutes, the room contained the chief executive, the general counsel, a man named Ovid from regulatory affairs, the corporate medical director, Kendrick Pellegrin, and a woman from communications who had clearly been told nothing and was trying to look calm about it. And at 9:41, a phone buzzed on the 12th floor, and Dexter Stoddard was told that he was needed upstairs. He came in, still holding a coffee, still wearing the face he wore into rooms, the one that said he had been expecting to be invited. He got 3 steps in, saw the general counsel, saw the chief executive standing rather than sitting, saw Pellegrin's expression, and only then, last of all, saw the man in the plain shirt at the far end of the table, with a visitor badge that said Candidate, BLD SVCS. The color went out of Dexter Stoddard's face in stages, like a building losing its floors. "Dex," Suzanne Winterbourne said. "Sit down." "What is this?" "Sit down." He sat. He looked at Gar. Gar looked back with no expression at all, which was somehow the worst part, and then Gar reached over and opened the brown folder for the first time. What came out of it, over the next 50 minutes, was not a speech. Garrison Bracewell had never given a speech in his life. It was a stack, and he laid it out on the airstrip table one document at a time, the way he laid out an assay. The first sheet was a certificate of analysis with his signature on it, dated 9 years ago, for the primary phenytoin material. "This is in your master file," he said. "You cite it in every audit you've passed since 2017. The second was the termination letter, a form letter, unsigned, generated by the procurement platform. This is how the chain ended. The third was a Corvus certificate, the beautiful one, with its hologram and its footer. This is what replaced it. Read the traceability statement out loud, Mr. Stoddard. Dexter did not. Traceable to the International System of Units through certified reference materials of higher order. Gar read for him. That is a true sentence and a worthless one. Every calibrator in the world is traceable to something of higher order. The question is how many links, and whether anyone at the top of the chain ever put a sample on a balance. He set down a printout of a Belgian accreditation registry page. This is the number in their footer. That laboratory dissolved in 2023. It was never accredited for reference material production. It made animal feed assays. Ovit from regulatory made a small sound. Then Gar laid out the charts. 4 of them, hand-labeled, from his own bench. Aldergate lot versus 9-bark primary. Phenytoin 18% low. Troponin 11% low. Digoxin 14. Lithium 9. Then I wrote to you, Gar said, and put down 3 letters. October 9th, October 30th, December 12th. All to vendor quality at your own portal address. The general counsel leaned forward. We have no record of. You do, Pellegrin said quietly. He had his laptop open now and had gone somewhere he had authority to go. He turned the screen around. On it was a mailbox rule, created on a Tuesday afternoon in September. Owner D. Stoddard. If subject or body contains traceability, or reference material, or 9-bark, move to folder later, mark as read. The folder had 411 items in it. Suzanne Winterbourne did not raise her voice. She said, Dexter, look at me. Did you read any of them? I get 1,000 emails did you read any of them? No, he said. Gar had one more thing in the folder, and he had saved it, because he had been raised by a man who taught him that you do not spend your best evidence early. There's a last piece, he said. It's the one that matters legally. He put a photograph on the table. It was a macro shot of the shoulder of a glass ampule, lit from the side, showing a faint, irregular constellation of laser marks. Every ampule that leaves my bench gets a fill line etch, he said. It's not decorative. The etch pattern is generated from the lot number and the fill sequence, and it's unique. And I keep the map. It's how I've traced counterfeits for 20 years, because nobody bothers to copy something they think is a scratch. He set a second photograph beside it. Identical constellation. This, he said, is an ampule from a Corvus shipment. Lot CRG 4471. Your Akron lab still had one in the back of a fridge. I bought it from a distributor who'd bought it from a liquidator. He tapped the first photo. And this is 9-bark lot NB-2211, which I decommissioned in 2022 and sold as scrap glass to a recycler in Cleveland, because the material was past its stability window and legally worthless. The room was extremely quiet. They didn't manufacture anything, Gar said. They bought my expired material out of a scrap stream, relabeled it, printed a hologram, and sold it back to you at $31,000 a year. You have been calibrating 406 laboratories against garbage that used to be mine. The medical director stood up and left the room to make a phone call. He was gone 11 minutes. When he came back, he looked older. We have 140,000 phenytoin results in the affected window, he said, and about 9,000 troponins under the threshold. Nobody said anything. Suzanne Winterbourne turned to look out at the lake for a moment, and when she turned back she was, in a way that Gar would later say he respected, entirely done pretending. Mr. Bracewell, she said, what do you want? Here is where the story could have gone the ordinary way. He could have taken a settlement. Any competent lawyer would have told him to. He had a contract that had been terminated on a fraud. He had evidence of a suppressed safety signal, and he had a dead man in Canton whose family had not yet been told why. Instead, Garrison Bracewell closed the brown folder and said, I don't want money, and I don't want a job. I want terms. Say them. 4. He held up a hand and folded fingers down as he went, and he had clearly written them somewhere in his head a long time before he walked into this building. 1. 9 days from now your assessors arrive. I will rebuild the traceability chain for all 14 assays before they do, from primary material, with my own hands, and I will sign it, and you will pay my published rate and not $1 more. I am not doing this for you. I am doing it because there is no one else who can do it inside 9 days, and I am not going to let 400 laboratories go dark because your company is embarrassed. Ovit started to say something about scope. Gar kept going. 2. Every patient result produced in the drift window gets recalculated and reissued, and every patient in the actionable band gets contacted and retested at your cost. Not a portal notice, a phone call from a human being. That will be somewhere north of 30,000 people, and it will cost you more than the recall itself. The General Counsel put his pen down. 3. Amelia Nakashima gets reinstated with back pay, her write-up expunged, and a written apology signed by whoever approved the restructuring that eliminated exactly one position in the state of Ohio. Who? Said the General Counsel. She's the tech in Akron who saw it in February and got fired for saying so, Pellegrin said. I've been trying to find her file for 2 weeks. 4. Gar looked down the table at Dexter Stoddard, who had not moved. You unseal the savings ledger. Every dollar of category savings claimed by supplier strategy in the last 2 fiscal years, with the vendor swaps that produced them, and you have an independent party check whether any of the others were bought the same way this one was. Suzanne Winterbourne considered him for a long moment. You understand, she said, that number 4 is the one that costs us the most. Yes, Gar said. That's why it's on the list. She agreed to all 4 before lunch. The General Counsel later described it as the fastest $400 million decision he had ever witnessed, and he was not entirely joking. What nobody in the room understood, except possibly Pellegrin, who had begun watching Gar the way you watch a man diffuse something, was that terms 1 through 4 were the visible part. The trap was already set, and it had been set in the room, in front of them, and the man it was for had walked into it on his own legs. Because at the very end, as the meeting broke, Gar had stopped beside Dexter's chair and said, in a voice pitched for 2 people, for what it's worth, if you can produce the original Corvus qualification file, the on-site supplier audit, the one you'd have done before you signed, this all looks a lot different for you. Negligence instead of the other thing. He let that sit. They'll ask for it Monday. Dexter looked up at him with the wet, grateful eyes of a drowning man handed a rope. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I have that. He did not have that. He had never set foot in Rotterdam. He had never set foot in Delaware. Gar walked out to the elevator and pressed the button and thought, with no particular pleasure, that a man who has cheated at everything his whole life does not know how to stop and will always, always reach for the pen. The 9 days were the hardest work of Garrison Bracewell's life, and he loved every hour of them. He slept at the creamery. Aldergate sent 2 people to help, and he sent one of them back because she kept opening the balance door before the air had settled. He worked the way Stedman had taught him, in the cold, early hours, with the radio off, weighing out primary material in a room where the humidity held at 42%, and the floor did not care what trucks were doing outside. 14 assays. 14 chains, each one rebuilt from the bottom, each value established by direct measurement and defended by an uncertainty budget he wrote out longhand before he typed it. On the 4th night, Pellegrin drove out with sandwiches and stood in the doorway of the milk room looking at the racks of ampoules for a long time without speaking. I've cited your name in 41 audits, he said eventually. I thought you were a department. I'm a room, Gar said, not looking up. Meanwhile, in a glass tower 40 minutes north, Dexter Stoddard spent a weekend committing the crime that would actually put him away. He had been asked for the Corvus qualification file, the on-site supplier audit, the manufacturing capability assessment, the signed approval memorandum, the documents that any regulated company must have before it lets a new vendor into the calibration chain. He had none of them, because he had never done any of it. What he had was a template, a scanner, and the belief, earned over a lifetime of getting away with things, that paperwork is just a story you tell confidently. He built the file on Saturday and Sunday. He wrote an audit report describing a 2-day visit to a facility he had never seen, complete with observations about their environmental monitoring and a minor finding about document control, because he had learned that a fake audit with no findings looks fake. He backdated it 14 months, and on the approval page, because the policy required an executive signatory above his level, and he could not exactly ask, he copied Xavier Kilbourne's signature from a purchase order, cleaned it up, and dropped it in. He submitted it Monday at 8:12 a.m. and felt, for about 30 hours, like a genius. Thaddeus Quiggle, the lead assessor from the accreditation body, was 63, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had spent 31 years being lied to by better liars than Dexter Stoddard. He opened the file on Tuesday afternoon, read 4 pages, and then did the single most devastating thing available to a man in his profession. He right-clicked and looked at the document properties. Created, 3 days ago. Modified, 3 days ago. Author, D. Stoddard. Template, supplier, Audit V4. A template Aldergate had only adopted 7 months after the date printed on the report. Quiggle took off his reading glasses, let them fall to his chest, and said, to no one, "Oh, son." By Thursday, the general counsel had brought in an outside firm. By Friday, the forensic imaging of Dexter's laptop had surfaced the scanned signature file, saved on his desktop, named, with a stupidity that made 3 separate attorneys put their heads in their hands, xk.sigs.cleaned.png. And when they showed Xavier Kilbourne a forged approval page with his own name on it, the senior vice president of procurement, a man who had until that moment been managing a survivable problem, went from Dexter's protector to Dexter's prosecutor in the length of a single breath. Kilbourne gave them everything. He gave them the meeting where Dexter had promised 9%. He gave them the pressure. And, because he had lawyered up and was performing cooperation, he gave them the thing he thought was small, a consulting arrangement between Corvus Reference Group and an entity called Stoddard Advisory LLC, $3,100 a month, paid to a bank account in Dexter's wife's maiden name, beginning the month after the contract switched. 11 months, $34,100. That was the price. 406 laboratories, 140,000 wrong numbers, a maintenance foreman dead in his driveway in Canton, sold for $34,100, and a bonus that Dexter never actually received because the fiscal year ended before payout. There is a version of this story where that is the ending. Federal charges, a perp walk, a headline, and all of that did happen, in its slow bureaucratic way. But it was not the part that Garrison Bracewell had been building toward, because Gar had never been at war with Aldergate Diagnostics. He had been at war with a table. On the second Sunday, he came home in the middle of the afternoon, which he had not done in 9 days, and found Katrina in the kitchen with her mother. Dolores stopped talking when he came in. Katrina had been crying, and had the particular brittleness of a person who has been crying about herself. "There he is," Dolores said, the consultant. News had reached the family in fragments, distorted by pride. Something about Dexter being on leave, something about Gar getting involved, something about lawyers. Nobody had told them the whole thing, because nobody in that family had ever asked Gar a question whose answer might require them to revise anything. "Katrina," Gar said, "sit down a minute." "Gar, sit down." He took the brown folder off the counter. Not the one from the tower. A second one. He put down a hotel folio, 22 pages, printed by a front desk manager who had been extremely apologetic once shown a court order. 14 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays. Room charges billed to a corporate card ending in the same 4 digits as the one on the Aldergate purchase orders. He put down her odometer log, in his own handwriting, in a small notebook, going back to February. 110 miles, 108, 112. He put down a photograph of a parking validation stub. He did not put down anything else, because he did not need to, and because his son was upstairs. Dolores said, "This is disgusting. You've been spying on your own." "I measured," Gar said, and something in the flatness of it stopped her. Katrina did not deny it. That was the only decent thing she did in the entire affair. She looked at the folio and put her hands over her face and said, "It was supposed to be nothing. It was 14 months. Dexter said. She stopped. "Say it." Dexter said if I filed first, and the story was that you couldn't provide, that I'd get the house in Easton, and it would be clean. Her voice cracked. He said nobody would fight it, because there's nothing to fight over, because you don't have anything. Gar nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed a reading he had taken 3 times, and wanted a 4th. Then he set down the last page in the second folder, and slid it across the table to his mother-in-law. It was a mortgage statement for the house on Fairmount. The refinance from 6 years ago, the one Langston bragged about. the one at the miracle rate that had let them keep the pergola and the boat. The payments were auto-drafted monthly from a credit union account. The account was in the name of 9bark Metrology LLC. Dolores Stoddard read it twice. Her mouth opened and did not produce anything. 6 years, Gar said. $71,400. I set it up when Langston's disability came through short and you were 3 months behind, and I asked the credit union not to put my name on the statement because he'd have refused it, and because it was nobody's business. He straightened the page so it sat square to the edge of the table, an old habit. I've paid for the pergola you throw the parties under. I paid for the boat trailer. I paid for Lindsay's wedding photographer, and I paid the second half of Dexter's bar tab at that wedding when the venue called me because mine was the only number that answered at midnight. Why? Katrina whispered. Why would you never say anything? And Garrison Bracewell, who had been laughed at all week by a family whose roof he was paying for, gave the answer that the General Counsel of Aldergate Diagnostics would later repeat at a compliance conference without knowing whose line it was. Because if you only do the right thing when someone's watching, he said, then it isn't the thing, it's the watching. The assessment happened on a Wednesday, and it happened in public, because Gar had insisted on that too. Not a press conference, something better. Aldergate had to demonstrate to the assessors that its calibration hierarchy was sound, and normally that demonstration is a filing cabinet. Gar proposed instead that they do it live, in the company's own auditorium, with the assessors present, the medical director present, and the whole thing streamed to every one of the 406 affected laboratories, because those were the people who had been quietly told for 5 months that their instincts were wrong. He set up on a folding table on a stage, which offended him aesthetically, and which he did anyway. A shipping case. A balance he had driven up himself, wrapped in a moving blanket, riding in the passenger footwell of the pickup like a dog. A rack of sealed ampules. He was not a performer. He read from his own notes, in a flat voice, and it was the most watched 40 minutes in the company's history. He showed them the chain. He drew it on a whiteboard with 4 boxes, the international definition at the top, then his primary material, then the secondary, then the calibrator in a hospital's fridge. He drew the Corvus version next to it, and when he got to the top box he drew an arrow that curved back into the middle, and stood back, and let 300 laboratory professionals look at a circle. Then he opened an ampule of new primary material, prepared it, and ran it on an Aldergate analyzer that had been recalibrated the night before against his chain. The screen showed a number. Beside it, on a second screen, was the certified value with its uncertainty. They agreed to the 4th decimal place. He did it again with the old Corvus calibrated instrument, which had been left untouched on purpose. 18% low. On the stream, in 406 laboratories, people who had been gaslit for 5 months about their own control charts began, in the chat, to type variations of the same 3 words. In the 3rd row of the auditorium sat a woman named Roberta Tully, whom Gar had called himself 8 days earlier, because he had decided that she should not learn it from a lawyer. She had asked him one question on that call: would it have changed anything? And Gar had told her the truth, which was, probably. Not certainly, probably. When he came off the stage, she took both his hands and did not let go for a while, and Garrison Bracewell, who had not cried at Oakley Stedman's funeral, had to look at the ceiling for a minute. Aldergate passed the assessment with 2 minor findings, both administrative. Quiggle's report contained a sentence that would be quoted for years. The corrective action was not a document, it was a person. Everything else fell in the ordinary way. Dexter Stoddard was indicted 11 weeks later on federal charges of falsifying records in a matter within the jurisdiction of a federal agency, wire fraud, and violations of the clinical laboratory statutes. And the forged audit was, as it always is, the count that made the rest inevitable. Not because the harm was greater, but because a jury understands a fake signature in a way it will never understand a traceability chain. He pled. He got 51 months. The consulting account bought his lawyer about 6 weeks. Xavier Kilbourne was terminated for cause, lost his equity, was debarred from federal contracting, and got divorced by a wife who had been considerably less patient than Garrison Bracewell. Katrina did not file first. Gar did, the following Monday, with an attorney named Lindsay Achterberg who had read the folio and the mortgage statements and the 14 years of tax returns and said mildly, "Oh, this isn't going to be a fight. This is going to be a formality." It was. The non-provider story died the moment anyone looked at a single page of it. Gar kept the creamery, kept the pickup, and kept his son, with a custody arrangement that he wrote to be generous, because he had watched what happens to a child raised in a house where one parent is a punchline, and he was not going to build the same thing pointing the other way. Aldergate contacted 31,400 patients. 209 of them had their therapy changed as a result. 19 were hospitalized within a week of retesting for things that had been quietly getting worse. Nobody will ever be able to put a number on the rest. Amelia Nakashima was reinstated with back pay, her write-up expunged, and an apology letter she framed and hung in the staff bathroom, which is exactly what you should do with an apology letter. 4 months later, she left the bench for good, because Gar offered her a job at Ninebark, and she is now the second signatory the creamery has ever had. Her handwriting is worse than his. He tells her this frequently. And in November, Dolores Stoddard came to the creamery. She stood in the gravel lot in a good coat, looking at a building she had described for a decade as a shed, and when Gar came out wiping his hands, she could not get to the point for almost 4 minutes. The point, when it arrived, was that the auto draft had stopped in September, and the bank had sent a letter, and Langston had had a small stroke in August that she had not mentioned to anyone, and she did not know how to say what she had come to say. "I know about the stroke," Gar said. "Easton told me. I sent the ramp guy." She started crying, which he had never seen. He let her finish. He did not enjoy it, and later he told Amelia that anybody who thinks that kind of moment is satisfying has never actually had one. Then he said, "I'll pay it through the end of the year. That's 4 more months. After that, it's yours. Garrison, I want to tell you why, because I don't want you to think it's about the laughing." He leaned back against the doorframe of the milk room. "I never minded being underestimated. It's useful, honestly. It's how you find out what people are actually like." He looked at her until she looked back. "What I mind is that you used it. You needed me to be a joke so that what your son was doing looked like ambition instead of what it was. That's the part I'm not paying for anymore." She asked if he would come to Thanksgiving. "No," he said, not unkindly. "But Easton can. Send someone to get him at 4. That winter, the boy started coming out to the creamery on Saturdays. Gar started him where Stedman had started him, which is to say on glassware, for 6 months, with no explanation. The first time Easton was allowed to touch the balance, he opened the door, set the weight down, and reached to close it in one motion, and his father put 2 fingers on his wrist. "Wait," Gar said. 4 minutes. The air has to stop moving." "Why?" "Because if you're in a hurry," Gar said, "the number will still come out. It'll just be a lie." They stood there together in the cold room, not talking, watching a number settle, while outside a pickup with a bad door sat in the gravel, waiting to not start on the first try. So that's the story, and I want to tell you what actually gets me about it, because it isn't the courtroom part. It's the 4 minutes. It's a man standing in a cold room telling a 9-year-old to wait for the air to stop moving, because the number will come out either way, and only one of those numbers is real. That is the whole thing in one image. Dexter Stoddard did not fail because he was evil. He failed because he could not tolerate 4 minutes. He needed the number now, the savings now, the promotion now, and every single thing he ever produced looked exactly like the real version, right up until somebody checked the timestamp. The other thing I keep chewing on is how the humiliation worked. Nobody in that family sat down and decided to hurt Garrison Bracewell. They just found it more comfortable to believe he was nothing, because if he was nothing, then their choices about him didn't require any thought. That's what contempt is for, most of the time. It's a labor-saving device, and the moment somebody's contempt gets convenient for them, they will defend it harder than they'd defend a fact, because facts don't hold up a self-image. Watch for that, honestly. Watch for the people in your life who need you to be small, and then notice what it's buying them. And the last thing, Gar had the evidence for months and it did nothing, because he sent it into a mailbox. The world doesn't run on being right. It runs on being right in front of the correct person. He didn't win when he found the fraud. He won when he sat down in a room he'd been invited to as a joke and let somebody read his name. If you've ever been the one they laugh about at the table, sit with that one for a second. I'm Nathan. If this one landed, subscribe, because I've got another one coming that I genuinely could not stop thinking about for 3 days. Take care of yourselves.